Hi all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer based in Charleston, South Carolina, who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. The Southern Fork is sponsored by me again this week. And since it's sponsored by me, I'm going to do something a little different. Welcome to a Southern Fork Charleston compilation show. Now, this isn't your typical clips show where I take old interviews and smash them together. No, I wanted to respond to some of the DMs that I have received over the last few months. Since we've all been cooking more, people have asked me about where I find recipes, or they've asked me specific things about prep, or in general, just kind of asked about sourcing and things like that. So I thought today that I would focus on 3 Charleston folks who have really inspired my food and cooking philosophy and helped it evolve over the years. Now, before I go into this, please know I am inspired every day by ingenuity, creativity, and the really just hard work of many, many people in the culinary realm. So these are by no means the only people that have inspired me, and definitely by no means the only people that have inspired me or are part of my community here in Charleston, South Carolina. But they are 3 people who illustrate tenets that have really become a big part of my personal food philosophy. And, food philosophy is just how you approach cooking and eating and sourcing and building your own personal food system. And I met all 3 of these folks as a professional. Interviewing them informed my professional work, and then it also bled over into my personal work. Additionally, these were 3 people that I would like to call the early adopters of the Southern Fork. So that first season, I was unproven. I was teaching myself audio engineering, and definitely that is always still going to be the case. I'm always teaching myself and learning something new about audio. It is not my natural inclination unless that just counts talking, but they said yes to being early guests of the show, even though we hadn't even debuted the show in some cases at that point. So I wanted to reach out again to them and actually talk to them specifically about some of the ways that they have inspired me. First up, Ann Marshall. Now, Ann Marshall and Scott Blackwell of Highwire Distillery were originally featured on episode 5, and I met Ann before the distillery was open in 2013, and the day I met her, she was on a forklift. That actually sums up Ann very well. She has a can-do attitude. She has a sharp business mind. She is definitely one of those people who are connectors. And so I have had the opportunity actually over the years to watch Highwire Distillery evolve and even work part-time at Highwire Distillery for a few years. So really wanted to talk to her about sourcing. So here she is talking about how Highwire Distillery chooses to source local product. Why do you source the way that you source for Highwire? Because it would be so much easier to not source the way that you source. Why is it important to you in the business?
Community is so important to us at Highwire, and having grown up in a pretty agriculturally centric family, I know how much work goes into growing a crop to send to market. And it was really important to us early on that we try to find the highest quality source we could, but also forge a path that would get us closer to a 100% locally sourced product here in South Carolina. This does a lot of things. The agricultural economy is very unpredictable. It's up and down. It's driven by commodity pricing. So events that happen in Iowa can completely disrupt the well-being of a South Carolina farmer. And having contracted grain in South Carolina, we are able to essentially have a closed loop network for our products. So the corn is grown here. The farmer that grows it knows exactly where his corn is going. There's no surprise. There's no middleman. He grows that corn for us, or she, as the case may be, grows that corn for us. And we pay for it and pick it up and turn that corn into whiskey. And then we take that spent grain. It doesn't actually end with the whiskey. That grain stays in the liquid that we distill. So that is then sent as a spent mash, we call it, to a local farmer to then feed cattle or goats. And our hope is that someday we'll be able to convert that grain into to upcycle it into perhaps poultry feed, a non-GMO poultry feed, which would be an incredible source for South Carolina farmers that are raising poultry.
I did not know that. That sounds really cool.
Continue to really try to complete a cycle here. Our dream, we're very good friends with Brittany and Matt Miller at Manchester Farms, and they produce these phenomenal quail. And our dream is to have them in our cycle of grain so that we might be able to supplement some of their feed for their poultry and then source some of their quail manure, or quap as they call it, to further enrich the fields in which we grow our corn, which would take it completely full circle.
This is not where you were when I first met you. We were not having quap discussions.
There was no holy quap.
But it's got to have informed, it's got to kind of build over time, right? And for somebody outside of this that is working on their own personal food system and how that works, it can be really intimidating. What was the step that got you started?
And to be honest, it should be intimidating. It is a labor of love, what we do. It's a project that really began out of curiosity, that may have gotten away from us in certain moments of the business when our demand exceeded our supply. It certainly has not been a direct path to where we are. A lot of this has been layered in. The common themes have been curiosity and really digging deep to embrace what we have locally, the resources we have, whether it is Clemson University, who has supported us from early on, to somebody like Glenn Roberts of Anson Mills, who has opened a lot of doors for us, to the farm network we've used from day one. And what's interesting is we started on a small scale. I don't think any of the farmers we work with today would have grown for us out of the gate. I don't think we were established enough. I don't think the project would have been enticing enough, and probably just more risky than they were willing to entertain for their farms. But what we've done is we started with 2.5 acres of growing Jimmy Red corn. And Clemson did that for us. That was an early pilot program that they used as an experimentation at their research farm down the road. And then we built on that program. From there, the Haygood family grew for us for several years.
So you tapped a network of friends and colleagues to kind of get started. You didn't just randomly call up a farmer.
No.
Right.
If we had called the farmers that we were working with today and said, hey, we have this amazing seed and we want you to plant 100 acres of it, and we think the yield will be this, but not if it rains more than this amount, or not if, we get a 1,000-year flood, or not,
Which we've had all of this since Anna's been in business.
And a hurricane every year. So it definitely, we had to earn our reputation as people who did what we said we would do. Right. And that has taken a lot of time. That has taken a big community building effort. And again, it all goes back to community. We were lucky enough that Glenn Roberts took a chance on us and entrusting us with Jimmy Red corn seed to begin with, that Ted Tuning held our hand through the first year as someone who had grown it successfully in the past, that Clemson was willing to put it in the ground to run trials on it. And then that we found the Haygood family and they were willing to take a chance on it themselves. And from there, we expanded into other farming families. We have stayed in the family farm system to date. In 2020, so this year, we added 4 new farmers. And these guys are professional farmers. They are not hobby farmers. They are not in it to experiment. They have families to feed. They have other farm programs they're trying to grow. So this has been a phenomenal learning experience as far as just upping our professional game a little bit, but also taking a step out, particularly in the time of COVID, on a fragile ledge of saying we're going to stick with our plan. We intended to grow close to 1 million pounds of corn this season, and we had to make our seed purchase decisions on March 16th, I believe, is the day that we made a decision about that. And that took a lot of guts. And the farmers were all calling us saying, are you sure? Are you sure? And we said, yes, and we will do this. And we're going to, make it right at the end. And, we'll get through this. And that confidence even that we had in making that decision would not have been there 4 years ago or even 3 years ago. I think just seeing the interest in this whiskey program we have made unfold, not just locally, but nationally as well. And just having the confidence that the business is intact and that it is in demand, and then being able to go 2 years out, because we're growing right now for whiskey that will be bottled no less than 2 years from now. So we are hopelessly optimistic whiskey makers, because we always assume that things are growing and we need to grow more and sort of prep ourselves for that moment.
If you think about a food system, and I'm going to create my own food system and really looking at why local is important. I didn't want you just to hear that from me, because, you hear it a lot from me, but local can really help strengthen your community. And also watching Ann and Scott evolve and grow with Highwire Distillery really has taught me the importance of food with a story, and food and drink that has a connection. So I really took from watching them source grain this idea of sourcing something you already need. So if you're wanting to change your own personal food system, let me explain to you how I did it. Well, I first looked at something that I purchase already. In this case, eggs. I bake. I eat a lot of eggs. I had egg on a salad for lunch today. So I said, okay, what if I can replace this with a local egg producer? So, of course, I found that's pretty easy to start with. In South Carolina, there's a program called Certified South Carolina, which asks residents to replace 10% of the food that they purchase and make it local. Purchase local foodstuffs, make sure that it's that. And in doing that, we'll keep millions of dollars in the state supporting the state farming community. So, of course, that number varies depending on the season. For me, it varies depending on the day. Sometimes I'm hungry and I'm just going to run by somewhere. I don't have any super hard and fast rules, but just like Anne, my eating local journey is an evolution. And I think that we can start where we are. And so that's what I did. I started with eggs. Now, once I've sourced some really great product, and sourcing can be a lot of fun if you just aren't trying to rush through it. If you realize there's story and community there, it's just a different way of shopping. But if I found some really great product and I'm going to try something creative with it in the kitchen, often this next guest's words will ring in my ears. Episode 18's Kevin Johnson of The Grocery in Charleston, South Carolina. He is lauded, and he actually is somebody that I've interviewed numerous times throughout the years. Kevin's work and his restaurant, The Grocery, hold a special place in my heart because my interview with Kevin about pickling and actually creating a restaurant larder was my first cover story in culinary writing. So I wanted to ask him specifically about the idea of layering flavors, because throughout the years, I've leaned on Kevin as an expert voice when I need a recipe that has a lot of layers of flavor, especially if I'm looking for something that is veggie forward. So I've always been impressed every time that I've had the opportunity to interview you about how sensible you build flavors and textures, and yet at the same time there's always something that's really kind of beautiful and elegant and a little bit fun about your work. That's kind of like a super sweet spot when it comes to cooking, and I think it's really kind of informed how I cook. I think I have a much bigger spice cabinet than I had when I first interviewed you a decade ago.
Right.
Can you talk about...
Decade ago. Wow.
Dude, really? It was the first year you were open.
Yeah, okay. We're getting there.
So I grew up with salt and pepper.
Right.
So how do you learn how much is enough? Obviously, we can do recipes, but... Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think typically we try to put enough to where you know it's there, but not enough to where it takes over something, you know? I mean, certainly some things have a more, sort of the spice element might, and not by spice, when I say spice, not spicy, typically it's just spices. But, sometimes it's just sort of more of a background layer that's, you can tell it's doing something, but you're not really sure what it's doing, and I think that's where a level is really good. Then it's so assertive that it's like, it doesn't really matter what you put the spices on at that point, because that's all you're getting.
Right. And so when you think about layering a dish and building a dish, I made a recipe a couple days ago from Dory Greenspan. It was a Moroccan inspired dish. Sure. And I thought immediately of you, and how I didn't know za'atar existed. Right. Okay, I'm going to admit that. I didn't know that before Kevin told me about it. And then I was like, I'm going to Google that. This is a long time ago. Don't hate me, food media folks. That seasoning of every layer so that when you taste that dish, you're not tasting. Can you talk a little bit about like soft herbs versus spices and how they go in?
Yeah. We've really grown into a very Mediterranean rim inspired restaurant. I just love the balance is there between, there's the spices and the acidity and the sweetness and the, salinity. They really hit a sweet spot, not only for, our cooking, but also the ingredients that we have around here. So, the balance between, adding those kind of warm, deep spices and really letting them develop into the dish, whether you're slow roasting something or just roasting it quickly in the wood oven.
And that means put them on early.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So like the spices, the seeds and those types of things. We add those early, and then sort of as a counter to that. So you've built this kind of deep, sort of sometimes a little bit of bitterness if it's kind of got the dark roast on it. And then, you have that layer, and then, lemon juice or some vinegar or pickle juice kind of to bring in the acidity. And then undoubtedly, tons of fresh herbs at the end to really bring that kind of floral level to everything and kind of balances it all out, especially when you're cooking something out of the wood oven, because you are going to have that bitterness layer on top of everything else. So we really want to have the acidity and the bright herbs to kind of counter that. So it's not just like, you're not just tasting like char.
Right. And char is that bitter flavor. Yeah. Your wood oven is how many degrees again? You told me. And
usually around, depending on, the coldest spot, it's probably 750. And then, right next to the coals is over 1,000.
Wow. So that's not my level of adeptness. Like, I'm not going to, set it, forget it.
Yeah.
Like, kind of thing.
It's very active cooking. It is very active.
But when you're cooking and adding these spices, I think sometimes the difference between a home chef, well, there's a lot of differences between a home cook and a professional chef.
Let's hope so, or I'm going to be out of work.
Yes. Let me just say that. You don't call yourself a chef, okay? Probably most chefs don't call themselves chefs. Yeah. It's really kind of gross. But anyway, especially if it's your Instagram handle, and I follow some of you and you know who I'm talking about. You might want to think about that. But anyway, is the amount of spices when you're saying adding a lot of soft herbs to the end, I'm thinking like 3 cilantro leaves and you're thinking like 3/4 of a cup, right?
Oh yeah. Like a bear claw full.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than others, but this whole like mincing of herbs a lot. I mean, there's some times where it certainly calls for that, but you're certainly willing to, chomp down on a lettuce leaf or something. Why not, if you've got all these different herbs and you actually like discover a piece of mint in this bite and then maybe a piece of Thai basil in that bite. So you're like experiencing different flavors, as you're going along, instead of if you just chop them all up, then it just becomes this melange of Thai basil and mint and cilantro, for instance, or something like that.
I love that. I love all of those things. Thai basil, mint, discovery, and a different discovery in every bite. I think your food is better today than when you opened, and that's really rare for a restaurant that hasn't changed concept, quote, quote, concept.
Right.
But I think your cooking today is better. Can you give me a reason why? Besides just the general, I do it every day.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, being here and wanting to be here, continually being inspired is certainly helpful. I wouldn't say that when we opened, we weren't doing everything we wanted to do, but I think now we really, really, really know what we want to do every day.
Yeah, got it.
And
there's a joy in that, right?
You still have to take, and it's not like the artist who said, I'm doing this no matter what and not taking anybody into account sort of mentality. We're obviously going to take our guests' likes and dislikes into account. I'm a chef, but I'm also a restaurant owner and have to sort of have that approach, but I think we've just really defined like what excites us and what we really want to cook and what the guests like, and then we kind of feed off of that, and it's just kind of built some more creative momentum. And as a chef who's trying to continually evolve, like you're really proud every day of what you're creating.
Right.
But then like you pull a menu from like 2 years ago and you're like, wow, what was that all about?
I know what that feels like. It's called, hey, I just read that article again. And oh my God, what did I do?
So yeah, I think we just we discovered that it was okay to do the smaller portion of our focus and allowed it to become our full focus.
Right. Love it.
Yeah.
You told me that there was one quintessentially layered dish.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Okay. So, I mean, all dishes, have depth and layers, but I myself am probably the biggest advocate for eggplant caponata of all time.
Okay. Did you see my face? It just kind of was like, oh, okay, cool.
All right. So probably undoubtedly one of the uglier dishes in the world.
Yes.
Even by the most adept cooks. But we have we continue to find ways to capture the flavors of eggplant caponata, but without it being that sort of
gooey thing.
Yeah. But I mean,
you're like, what is that?
But I mean, like
good.
the bitterness of the eggplant, the sweetness of the the dried fruit of the raisins, the salinity of the capers and the olives, and then the anchovies, and just a little bit of spice, and then the acidity from the vinegar. It's like you want to talk about building some textures and flavors.
Okay, let's talk about that for just a second then. Okay, it already sounds better than any eggplant caponata I've ever had. But I'm not a huge eggplant person, and I think there's a dividing line with that.
Yeah.
But all of those other things I love.
I mean, I'm a lover of vegetables. I used to be a vegetarian, and probably about 5 years ago, if you would have said, if you had to pick your least favorite vegetable as a vegetable lover, what would it be? And undoubtedly, without hesitation, my answer would have been eggplant.
Right. Yeah.
But as I have continually had very delicious and well-grown and fresh eggplant over the several years, I've discovered that it doesn't. Yes, the eggplant at the supermarket in January is not the one we want to.
It's one step away from a loofah.
He needs a new PR agent.
He needs a lot more than a PR agent. He needs a.
But it's so diverse. I mean, it's just
the varieties are different, and I love the idea of actually working with the bitterness of the eggplant, because that's what a lot of people don't like about it. Like, I definitely under-season my eggplant normally. And everybody's always trying to salt it to make it less bitter and stuff. So you're working with what it naturally is and then building that, because bitter is a wonderful element of food.
As long as it's not the only element of the food.
Right.
So you do have to kind of.
You don't want to eat eggplant like an apple.
Right. No.
It sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm really going to be thinking about eggplant differently, but that idea of layering and layering flavors is something that every time I do it right and lean into that in the kitchen and actually lean into seasoning food, adding herbs, not cutting corners in the kitchen and not buying that bunch of fresh parsley because I don't know what it does, but actually saying, okay, I'm going to do that. The results are always so much better. And I think that comes with experience for sure, but it also comes with building your knowledge in the kitchen and also a spice cabinet, like I was saying, an understanding of the herbs and the spices and the vegetables that you're working with, and having joy to actually still be inspired season after season to try to go back and make something better, to work with an ingredient's natural attributes, whether it's a firm fish or it's a flaky fish, or whether it's a bitter vegetable or a sweet carrot. That can easily translate to the home kitchen because most of us don't change the texture or something, and we don't have a sous vide machine. Some of us do, but it's a great way to approach cooking. Now, with all of that, knowledge is work. And this is actually work and practice. And our next guest has taught me about putting in the work. I chatted with Bob Cook, executive chef now of Edmund's Oast, for episode 8 about his condiment company called Burnt and Salty. And I've known Bob a long time, and he worked as almost a decade or longer as Craig Deal's sous chef at Cypress as they developed a charcuterie program and became one of the hottest restaurants in Charleston at the time, and actually a restaurant that I still miss. Craig, Bob, Andrea. But he put in the work. He is a self-taught chef, like many chefs are, and he is that 10,000 hours guy. This really has informed my philosophy of cooking because I'm around chefs and I watch them, and a lot of what they do is very repetitive. They teach themselves in the kitchen. They learn techniques and they repeat it and repeat it. And yet when we're in a home kitchen setting, we expect to be able to do something on the first try. And that's not the way it often is. Putting in the work, there's something to be said for that. You worked under Craig Deal for a decade, and I'll never forget that you said, I worked around the edges that I could work, and that's where Burnt and Salty came from. Can you talk about that evolution of how putting in time in a space has brought you to this space when you knew you were kind of ready?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say that I recommend it for everyone, but I don't know that I do. It's like I've had to make a lot of sacrifices, just like a lot of people have, family, friends, fun time. I wouldn't change anything that I've ever done or how hard I've ever worked or the hours that I've ever put into any restaurant or project or anything. But I don't think it's for everyone. There's people that are smarter than me. There's people that are better chefs. It just happened to be for my situation, not having gone to school and whatnot, that I had to prove myself, number one, to myself differently and to chefs differently. I never claimed to know a lot, but I would, make up for that with, I'll be here grinding, busting my ass, not just here like hanging out, but
right.
Here working.
Right.
As much as I possibly can to learn.
Right.
So that's kind of always been my philosophy is I can outwork anybody, which is tapering off a little bit the older I get. But as a younger chef, definitely that was how I knew the edge that I had ahead of people.
I want all these people that have started cooking to keep cooking.
Right.
And I've deepened my cooking practice this pandemic, these last few months. I like to really repeat a recipe until I know it. Is that or technique? Is that something that you did? You had to have certain kind of ideas of techniques that you would do, right?
Yeah, I would say
to learn.
Yeah, that you learn. You just do it over and over and over. So, I guess a couple glaring examples would be the charcuterie program that we started doing at Cypress. We didn't have any idea how to do it when we first started, but we just knew if we kept trying it and we knew how to be honest with ourselves. I think that's one of the big things when you're a self-taught person is you really have to be honest with yourself. And don't just instantly think, oh, I made this is better than anyone I've ever had. That's one thing that Craig and I were really good at was knowing where we needed to improve, where we could, where we thought we were good and being very honest with ourselves.
I call it putting on the lab coat.
Yeah.
Like you put on the lab coat and you're like, okay, let's assess this now.
Yep. Let's take an actual look at this, zoom out a little bit, take a look at this, put our pride aside, put our egos aside. Is this a quality product? Where does this fall in the, would we serve this, scale?
Right.
And, we did that for salamis and meats, salumis, breads. When we started AMS, we started a bread program. I didn't know how to bake, but we taught ourselves, and we ended up opening a restaurant where we, did all the salumi and all the bread. And
right. You made sandwiches
for a long time. Definitely wasn't the quality of like some of great bakers, but it was pretty damn good. So yeah, I think also, I think a big takeaway from teaching yourself is to definitely learn to be honest with yourself and where to improve that product or your skill or your mindset.
So for me, I would equate you becoming a leadership role in the kitchen. Now the executive chef of Edmund's Oast, and then after helping open AMS and working there, and then now you're a partner in Edmund's Oast. How did you know you were ready? Like, I've known you for years, and I would always say, gosh, I wish you would take an executive job, but I didn't know that you were going to ever do it.
Right. That's a great question. I've always struggled with, and I'm sure a lot of people have, like knowing when I'm ready for something. Like for years I didn't have kids because I didn't think I was ready. Now I look back on it, I've been ready for years, but just never kind of wanted them, I guess. But I find comfort in uncomfortable, in being uncomfortable. And I feel like that's where I really like put my best foot forward, is when I'm really uncomfortable. So I need to be pushed to that you're ready stage a lot, right. Or, even if it's just kind of mentally stepping off on my own. I am a little bit slow on that. It's tricky to know when you're ready or to think you're ready. Or honestly, I could say if I've made, 10 major life decisions, I've probably thought I was ready for maybe one of them. And,
right.
Instead of just doing it, and
lots of times it's coming towards you. And so you have to say yes or no. And you're like, figure it out.
I'll
right.
just figure it out. Yeah.
Right.
Like you just have to look back and go, well, I guess I'm not an idiot. I'll figure it out. Right.
Right. And, that's the thing with cooking too. I think what has been exciting to watch your evolution, and this is really kind of the last question I'll ask, when you get so serious and you have to teach yourself and you're working so hard and it's just like a thing, it's not super fun.
Yeah, it can be.
So
not
how
fun.
do you inject that kind of whimsy or curiosity back into being in the kitchen?
There's a certain amount that you have to realize that it is your job, and it's not all fun. It's every moment isn't going to be, dancing around like twinkle toes. There are moments that like, this kind of sucks. I mean, especially now during COVID,
Yeah, it's there's a lot more moments.
There's a lot of moments that suck. But you have to be able to look forward to those things that do make it worth it to you. Like, for me, it's talking to a guest, or, seeing someone that loved a dish, or, even sometimes they're like, hey, when are you going to bring this back? Very heavily documented examples of that happening in my career.
There's one that I noticed was back on after we all said that we would never do it.
What are you going to do? Never say never, right? But you look for those moments that really get you off. Whatever that moment might be, whether it's like turning out that perfect roasted chicken, or, a lot of times when I put something new on the menu, that really gets me. Like, even if it's just kind of something new on there to get going, like having taken something off, because taking stuff off menus is hard too.
Right.
Even if it's like, even sometimes like things you kind of consider losers. I mean, I've put dishes on the menu that I'm, put a couple out and you're like, oh man, what was I thinking? It's even hard to take those off sometimes. You're like, oh man,
let me see if I can do it better, or let me see
or
if
just
people
nix
just
this
like
whole idea.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think you have to look for those moments of, and it might not even be something in the kitchen. It might just be, getting through to your day off and you're going to go out on the boat or something like that. Just looking for those moments that are going to get you through and make you happy. And that's especially important now, during COVID and during this whole
It should have always been
recession.
important.
It should have always been important. That's exactly right.
And there you have it. We're back full circle to that inspiration thing, looking for that inspiration in the kitchen. I have told people who aren't interested in cooking before that I think of cooking as a craft project that you can eat. But I am a bit facetious sometimes in that, because I do think that thinking about food, discussing food, can really open the doors to so many other things. It can make us think differently about the environment, differently about where we live, help us get to know our neighbors or cook for them. And it can also help us personally. Bob mentions in this piece that he had to work really hard to prove something to himself as well as to others. But that is something that learning how to cook a few dishes has really done for me. It has been a very, it's really led to empowerment. To know that you can sustain yourself by cooking a few dishes is a wonderful thing. And I would love for more people to know how to do that. It doesn't have to be for anybody else. It can just be for you. And then you open the door and you invite somebody to the table. So, there are some Charleston people for you and some food philosophy for you. And it's getting close to dinner time, so I've got to start figuring out what I'm going to cook tonight. So thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations. But in the meantime, I have one question. Are you going to eat all that?